We're talking about some of the big names that have run up so far this year. NVIDIA is a great example, trading at about 51 times forward earnings. Is that too expensive for what this stock offers, really being the leader when it comes to AI chips?
Yeah, I mean, maybe let me start a bit broader, right? I mean, it looks like that we're kind of like coming slowly towards the peak of like a hype cycle, right? So hype cycles generally are a lot shorter than the real implementation cycles where you really go into revenue generation mode. So generally they're kind of like 8 to 10 times longer. But I think what's interesting is that when you kind of like look at valuations, it's not unprecedented. We have seen that when you go back to like the 1990s or 2000s, you had seen even companies like Qualcomm going up 2,000% or Cisco going up or tripling in value. It is just a question of if the concentration that you have in a few stocks right now, if that is actually healthy, especially when you think about some of the investors also having to stick to valuation discipline out there.
So Rocco, in all fairness, you're talking about the tech bubble, the .com bubble, that same period of time. So Nancy, I'm going to toss it over to you. Are valuations getting too high? I just mentioned NVIDIA. That's a great example of a stock that's really run up on this AI hype cycle, as Rocco called it. 51 times forward earnings compared to the NASDAQ trading at about 29 times.
Well, it's too expensive for us, Frank. But I was investing during that tech bubble period, and this is not that. I mean, that was peak earnings, multiples at 80 to 100 times. We're in trough earnings, you could argue. And so I think there's room for many of these stocks. That doesn't mean they're going to go straight up from here, obviously. They will recalibrate at some point, and we will use that as an opportunity if the recalibration is material to step in and top off some holdings. Recently, we've been trimming because we're well overweight technology across our strategies. But it's important to note that short interest is still elevated in the queues, and that leaves room for further short covering. Okay. So you probably will continue to see some sort of a melt up at some point during the rest of this year. But in the near term, we're sitting back and sitting tight with what we already own.
All right, so one stock that's really had a big run up, looking at Apple right now, up almost 40%, 39% year to date. Not really tied to this whole AI thing. However, they do have a huge announcement later today. This mixed reality VR, AR headset. It's hardware. It's not software, which seems to be moving the market higher. What does that say to us about just the excitement over this and the fact that Apple's run up without a big AI announcement?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you want to look at the characteristics of the likely AI winners, you have to look at three things. So one is certainly compute power and the ability to actually spend in CapEx. The second thing is certainly to have a lot of first-party data or to have kind of like an environment like iOS where you can build on. And it's the ability to kind of like build these applications, which means you need a lot of PhDs and engineering talent. And when you look at Apple, I mean, it's probably less clear of like what they can do in the short term, but they can play the privacy card. So using kind of like on-device data to train local agents without kind of like needing to upload data to the cloud or cloud services and to run large language models. And that's certainly the edge that they're going to have in AI.
Yeah, I think large language model seems to be the buzzword of this entire year, and every company trying to figure out some way to work it into their products and their offerings. Nancy, I want to come back over to you. We just talked about Apple very briefly, but Apple kicks off its Worldwide Developers Conference today, where Tim Cook and company, they're reportedly set to unveil their mixed reality headset, VR, AR. We're looking at just a wall right now, some of the big releases from Apple over the years. What do you think about this release? Is it going to be as meaningful as an iPad or even an Apple Watch? And how does this all impact Apple's position when it comes to big tech and this AI race and everything else?
Well, yeah. So putting a computer on one's face is something that some people are going to sort of shy away from. But I think from a technological standpoint, this is a critical moment for Apple. It's been 8 years since they've launched a new product. One of their great strengths, Frank, I believe, is that they sit back. They're not necessarily first to market, but they sit back. They build the process around the software acquisitions that Apple's made, as well as hardware, have really led to this development of the mixed reality Pro. And I do think that this is critical from that standpoint. It will remain to be seen what developers decide to do with the hardware, right. And that will drive, I think, acceptance and adaptation to this particular piece of equipment.
Right. Meta hasn't had a lot of success with its VR, AR headset. And so, Rocco, you're sitting here, so I can see, you're shaking your head I don't know what you're shaking it about, but what are you shaking your head about? One last point.
Yeah, I mean, just to come back to Apple, right? I mean, when you think back when the Apple Watch came out, right? So like, there were many analysts kind of like projecting 20 million sales or 20 billion sales, 30 million sales, like in the first few months, and it turned out to be like a few million or so. It is less about, like how many consumers are actually going to adopt it. It's more kind of like what kind of like developer environment or ecosystem can you build around it, and then you have to give it a few years. And that's true for Meta as well with respect to AI applications and so on, before you really see revenues coming in against that. So you have a lot of lumpy upfront costs going to happen in AI, while the real revenue generation opportunity sits probably, like a few or maybe 5 years out from here.